This video is brought to you by Driver61. Driver61 now has a motorsports store, so if you're looking to buy a new racing helmet, overalls or more, head over to driver61.com/shop for some great deals. Hi, I'm Scott Mansell and welcome to Driver61's definitive circuit guide to the Hungaroring. The Hungaroring is 3.4 kilometers long, consisting of 16 corners. We're riding on board here with one of my clients, Yanni Herpy, in his Radical SR3 to show us around the circuit in some more detail. In this circuit guide we're going to take a look at braking references, racing lines and everything that you need to be quick at the Hungaroring. So here we are on the start-finish straight. Just for those of you who are racing at this circuit, just going to point out a few things on the start-finish straight. So first of all, we have the finish line that you can just see here right in front of us. Obviously this is where they'll put the checkered flag out at the end of any sessions or any races. If we just move forwards slightly, we're going to move to the start line, which is in a different place, and as you can see up ahead of us we've got the start lights here. So this is where they'll start the race from, and if we move forward a few frames you'll actually see that this is pole position here on the left hand side. You can see the starting box here, and the start line is just here in front of us. So two different positions for the start and the finish line, something just to know if you're going to be racing at the Hungaroring. So here we are on the longest straight of the circuit, really the only proper straight at the Hungaroring. It's not massively long, which means that overtaking at this circuit can be quite difficult, as you'll know if you've watched any Formula 1 from the Hungaroring. So we're heading down to turn 1, which is a tight 180 degree hairpin right-hander, and obviously the braking area will be critically important as you're coming down here. Luckily there's quite a few references that you can use in your peripheral vision as you're coming down to turn 1. First up we have the 200 meter board on the left hand side. Now that'll be quite early in most cars, and especially in this Radical. This Radical is not particularly quick in a straight line and stops very quickly, so the braking zones in this car are very late and very deep into the corner. Something to bear in mind if you're going to be coming to the Hungaroring in a GT car, for example, which will be quicker in a straight line and have slightly longer braking distances. So we've got the 200 meter board there on the left hand side. We've got a marshal's post here as well that you could also use as a reference. We're heading down. Probably the braking zones will be a little bit closer down towards this 100 meter board on the left hand side here, but basically you've got lots of braking references on the left hand side, so that isn't really going to be a problem. It's just what you need to do is when you're trying to find the ultimate braking point is pick one earlier in the session that's nice and early, be conscious of it, and then gradually move yourself deeper and deeper into the braking zone until you just go that tiny little bit too far past the apex, and then you can bring your braking zone back up the circuit. Now on the exit, or on the outside rather, of turn 1 here, there is some asphalt, some tarmac on the outside, so if you do make a mistake, if you do go a little bit deep, or if you need to run wide at the start of the race, there is that area on the outside just to run wide if you do need to. Now you can see that Jan is bringing the car to the inside of the circuit quite early here. Now that's because he's probably gone in a little bit deep on the brakes, and he's just trying to get towards that apex. Now on a hairpin it doesn't really make that much difference because he's going to be down at the apex for quite a long time here. So as you can see, he'll be looking across at the apex here, the apex curbing on the inside, and he should already have been doing that from long before the braking point. So we're using our peripheral vision for the braking reference, but we're having our focus down here at the apex point on the inside of the corner. Now he's bringing the car in. This is the first look that we have at the curbs around the Hungaroring. Because it's a Formula 1 circuit, all the curbs are standardized across the track, so they're all very similar. The apex curbs have a bit of an angle to them, to be honest. They're quite wide, but they have an angle like this to them, so you can use, depending on your car, you can use quite a lot of them, but as you get up towards the inside of the curbing on the inside, they do become quite steep. So for example, in this Radical, we could probably use about half up to this point of the apex point, of the apex curb, which you'll see Yanni using throughout the lap. But maybe in a GT car we can use a little bit more of the curb, because They're not huge. If we did use that bit extra of the curb in the radical here, because it's so stiff, the car wouldn't accept it, and it would unstabilize the car. So only using half the amount of the curb was about right in the radical. The exit curbs, which we'll see in a little while, dead flat. Yes, they're quite aggressive as you get further out of the curb, further across the curb, but they're dead flat. So you can use quite a lot of that curb on the exit, which we'll see a little bit later in the video. So Jan is bringing the car in towards the apex here, and you can see, although there's no sausage curb or anything on the inside, you can see the rubber beginning to build up on the inside here. You can just see the dark patches of rubber. So when you go to Hungaroring and you're looking for the apex points, it's quite subtle and you can't see it from a long way, but you'll see where the rubber is on the inside of the curbing. So Yanni's made it pretty much to the apex here, nice and late on the brakes, and now he's looking for the exit point on the outside of the corner here. And as I mentioned, we can use all of that curb on the outside of the track. Coming through the hairpin is back on the accelerator, as you can see down here with the throttle trace. Getting back on the accelerator, and we are moving the car towards the outside of the track. As I mentioned before, the exit curb here is nice and flat, so we can use all of that. You can use a little bit more. You can see this thin strip of concrete on the outside here, but beyond that we've got some AstroTurf, which if you're in a high power car you don't really want to run onto because it will cost you a little bit of traction. However, also bear in mind that you've got this tarmac on the outside here. Now it is illegal, obviously, with track limit rules to run over this, but if you do make a mistake or if you do get pushed out there when you're racing, then it's not that difficult to just run out wide. And as you can see over here, once the AstroTurf finishes, you can come back onto the track and you don't lose any time. Now, I hate using any runoff. I think it should all be grass. But we have these tools available to us nowadays, and if you do run over the AstroTurf, if you do get pushed out wide there, it's not going to cost you too much time. Now we're heading down the hill under the bridge here to turn 2. Now turn 2 is extremely tricky. We're coming downhill, and as you go in, the track falls away from you, becomes off camber, so it's really easy to make a mistake here. As you're coming out of turn 1, you want to bring the car back over to the right hand side of the track, parallel with the white line on the outside here. So we've got the steering wheel straight, we've got the platform of the car as flat as we can, so that when we get on the brakes, we're braking as optimally as we can going into turn 2. So coming down to turn 2 here, from this video here, you can see that the track again falls away even more than it is on the run down to turn 2. In terms of braking points, let me just run it back here a little bit. In terms of braking points, we've got the bridge, which will just come into shot now. So the bridge is actually here. You've got the end of the bridge here. You've got a 100-meter board on the right hand side. So again, you've got lots of braking references as you're coming down into turn 2. Also, you've got the beginning of the entry curb on the right hand side here. Now, as I always say in these videos, it's not that we are braking exactly where these points are, maybe 5 meters before, 5 meters after, 10 meters after, but at least you've got a reference so you can build later braking into your lap and gradually get closer and closer and better on the brakes as you're coming through each of the big braking areas. So you can see now Jan is bringing the car somewhere towards the middle of the road. Now the reason that we're not just on the outside here, as would be a traditional racing school line, is that if you're all the way out there, because of the camber and because of the way the corner is, you just can't get the car back into the apex. So if you're all the way out here before you turn in, because the circuit falls away, you just won't be able to bring the car in towards the apex. So what Jan is doing here is exactly right. We want to be somewhere in the middle of the road, probably just, if the middle of the road's here, we're probably just to the right hand side of the middle of the road slightly. And this is going to set him up perfectly to apex into turn 2. As you can see, the circuit's falling away here. So as I mentioned before, it's really easy to make a mistake. So you have to come in here with probably 5 or 10% less speed than you think you can carry in here. It's really easy to make a mistake because you feel like you can carry more speed than you actually can in here. So we've got our vision looking a long way around the corner here, and we're looking for the curb, which is just a plain white curb here at this moment on the inside here. And as you can see here, we're making the apex a long way around the corner. It's actually 3/4 of the way around the corner. Now the reason for that is, if you look at the circuit map just up here, we're coming through turn 2, and then we have a period of track where we're flat out on the accelerator. So although it's not that long, it's important that we get a good exit coming out of turn 2 so that we can carry the speed along the next straight. Well, it's a kink and a straight, but you get what I mean. We want to be flat out for as long as possible. So we're apexing quite late here. Again, there's no real marker for the apex of turn 2. However, again, you can see there's a lot of rubber built up on the inside. So that's a good way to identify where the apex of the corner generally is. Now, as we come out of turn 2, you'll see that there's no runoff on the outside on the exit. As we're in the mid corner and the entry of turn 2, you'll notice just on the right hand side, let me just wind the video back a little bit. On the outside here, there is quite a lot of runoff, so there's tarmac or concrete on the outside of the corner. So if you do go in a bit quick, if you do make a bit of a mistake, you can run off on the outside, and it won't cost you that much time. It will cost you time here because the circuit's falling away and you won't be able to bring the car back in towards the apex. But it's just nice to know that you have a bit of safety margin on the outside of the circuit. Now, turn 3 is flat out in most cars. Now, you'll see that Yanni isn't actually making the curb on the outside of the track here, and the reason for that is that we need to get the car over to the left-hand side to get through turn 3, the right-hander, which is a right-hand kink, as fast as we can. In most cars, it's flat out through this right-hander. Now, in the Radical, you'll see that he's using a lot of the road on the right here, more than you would in most cars, because he doesn't need to get the car over to the left as much as you might do. So as you can see here, this is as far as he comes over to the left-hand side, and he's started to turn into the right-hand kink here. And the Radical, because it's got lots of grip and it isn't massively quick in a straight line, it doesn't need to use all of the road on the outside of the track here. If you're in a car that's going to be a bit quicker in a straight line and doesn't have as much downforce as the Radical, you're probably going to need to be all the way over to the right-hand side here to open up the right-hander. So it's more important to restrict turn 2 on the exit, get the car back over to the left-hand side so that you can then open up turn 3 and try to keep the car flat out through turn 3. So in the Radical, turn 3 is relatively easy. We're just taking a little bit of curb here on the inside, making the middle of the curbing, and then letting the car run to the outside. Again, as I mentioned, if you have a car that doesn't have as much grip and has slightly more power, then turn 3 might be a bit more challenging because you're going to need to use all of the road and possibly all of the curbing on the outside here. So the curb on the outside, I would only recommend using up to the outside of the curb here. You can actually see the divots in the curb here are actually quite big. The way that the sun's shining on the curb here, you can actually see how big or how aggressive the curb is on the outside here. So yes, you can run on it, but just be a little bit careful. Beyond that, onto the AstroTurf, I wouldn't recommend using the AstroTurf out here. It doesn't have as much grip as the curb, and also if you go beyond that, then you get onto the concrete on the outside here, which really doesn't have that much grip. It'll be full of marbles. It'll be dirty, a dirty piece of track. So coming out of turn 3 up to turn 4 now. Now turn 4 is particularly difficult. As you can see, we're coming up here. We're in 5th gear in the Radical, and at this point, we can't see the apex, which is somewhere over here. So turn 4 is a quick corner, a quick flick left, but you can't see the apex when you're approaching it. So it's very tricky. It's one of those corners that you do need to have a little bit of experience with because you can't see the apex as you're approaching. Now, the thing to do on the approach is you want to be quite a long way over to the left because the circuit kinks to the right just a little bit on the approach. So what we want to do is bring the car around the outside and then across the track so we get the platform of the car as flat as possible so that when we are braking, just about now in the Radical, which is super late, but what's important here is that the steering wheel is straight, we're heading in a straight line, so the car's platform is flat and we can brake in the shortest distance as possible. So you can see here in the radical, which is super late to get on the brakes, he's just getting off the accelerator. You can see on the data in the bottom left of the corner, and he's beginning to turn the car in. Now, as you come up over the crest here, then you can just see the hint of the curb on the inside here. So as it happens, as you come up over the crest, as soon as you see the curb on the inside, that's exactly when you need to turn in. So it's really important that you have your vision already looking across for this apex on the inside, so that as soon as you see it, you can begin to turn the car in. As you can see now, Jan has begun to turn the car in towards that apex. On the inside here, he's got a bit of oversteer there, as you can see, with the steering wheel as he's come up over the crest. So as you do come up over the crest, it could be that the rear of the car becomes a bit light because you're turning, you're coming up over the crest, you're decelerating slightly, and it's all formed so that the rear of the car will probably become a little bit light. So you do have to be a little bit careful as you're turning into turn 4. So as we're coming in towards the apex here, we're making the middle of the curb. Now, it's quite a strong, aggressive curb here, so you don't want to take too much. Maybe if you're in a GT car, you can take a lot. But in the radical, in a single-seater, you don't want to be launching the car right over the curb because it will destabilize the car a little bit too much. So Yanni's collected the oversteer that he's had. We're back on track. He's used probably the middle of the curb there and is getting back on the throttle towards the exit. Now, as you come up over the crest here, come out of the corner, the exit of the corner really comes up on you very quickly. So you just need to be aware of that because it's easy to make a mistake here. Now, Yanni's not used too much of the curb here, but I would advise using all of the red and white curb, but not too much beyond that because it does get very aggressive. This red strip on the outside of the normal curb here is very aggressive, and then beyond that you've got the dirty concrete on the outside of the curbing, which it's good to have there as a safety margin, but if you do run onto it, you will lose a bit of time because it is tricky to get back on. And the way that the corner is you'll go onto it and you'll go onto the concrete for quite a long time, so then it's difficult to get back across to then get on the brakes for the next right-hander. So next up, we're coming up to turn 5, another tricky 180 degree. It's not hairpin because it's quite quick. It's third gear, fourth gear in this radical. Now the braking for it is very tricky. It's one of those that you probably need to do a little bit on feel, but we do have some references on the left-hand side of the circuit here. So for example, we've got the end of the tyre barrier here and the marshal's post on the left. So just bear those in mind when you are on track and see if your car or your braking point can be used with these braking references. So you can see Jan is bringing the car across to the middle of the track again, much like we did at turn 2. Again, you don't necessarily need to use all of the circuit on the left-hand side here, because if you do bring it out there, then firstly you're making the braking area extended somewhat. So you want to bring the car somewhere towards the middle of the track here and try and V the corner off a little bit more. So we're braking across the track here, turning it at this point, and then getting back on the accelerator and trying to straighten up the exit as much as we possibly can, rather than having one long radius all the way through the corner, which will probably not be as quick as Ving the corner off. So we're bringing the car in towards the apex here. You can see that we're not quite making the inside of the corner at the entry. We're waiting to a little bit later in the corner. And again, you can see those telltale marks of the rubber building up on the inside. So this is where the apex is. There's no big sausage curbs here at the Hungaroring to point out the apexes for us like there are at other circuits. But we do have this rubber on the apex here. You can see that Jan has not quite made the apex. He could have been a little bit closer at this point. So we're making the apex three quarters of the way through the corner, where all the rubber buildup is on the inside of the track here. Then it's a case of just getting on the accelerator as much as we can towards the outside of the track. You can see on the outside here there is a bit of runoff, but generally you're not being pushed out there in the way that the corners forms. You're not being pushed out there. So maybe only if you're in quite an aggressive battle with somebody will you get pushed out there if you're on the outside. But in normal driving, if you're just in qualification or something like that, you won't generally be put out here yourself. So the exit kind of opens up and you never feel like you quite make the outside of the track. You can see here that Yanni hasn't quite made or isn't using all of the curbing on the outside. So as you're coming through the apex of turn 5 here, you always feel like you can get on the accelerator a little bit sooner. So experiment with that. As you come out, if you feel like you haven't made the exit or used all the road on the outside of the track, then just try to get on the accelerator that little bit sooner, and it will hopefully naturally push you towards the outside of the track. Again, with the exit curbing, I would use all of the red and white curbing and nothing beyond that. Well, firstly because it's dirty out there and you don't need to use all of that road on the outside of the circuit here. So next up, we're coming up to turns 6 and 7. Quite a tricky little right-left chicane. And coming down to 6 and 7, we've got plenty of braking references on the left-hand side of the circuit to use in our peripheral vision. So first up, we've got the 100-meter board. And then we've got the start of the entry curb here on the left-hand side. If you're going even later than that, you've got the marshal's post on the left as well, just here. But I doubt that anything will be braking as late as this radical. So more to the point, you'll be using the 100-meter board or the start of the entry curb on the left-hand side here. Now, it's really tricky coming into 6 and 7. It's really easy to carry too much speed in here, and it's important to see here on the outside we do not have any asphalt runoff. It's actually a gravel trap, quite a deep gravel trap. So if you do make a mistake here, you'll go into the gravel, and you know it's difficult to say whether you'll make your way out of it or not. So just be careful coming into 6 and 7. As we're bringing the car into the apex here, you can see that the apex point is marked by this sleeping policeman on the right hand side, which is there so we don't use too much curb. However, the inside curb here is very aggressive, especially if you're in a single seater or a radical or some other kind of sports car. However, if you're in a GT car, you need to see how much of the curb you can get away with using without destabilizing the car too much. I guess that you'll be able to use a lot more curb than you can in the radical, so if you can, try to use as much curb as you possibly can legally, so that you can open up this chicane as much as possible. At this point, you can see that if you do make a mistake here, there is a shortcut across the track. Now, obviously, we don't want to be using that at any points because it isn't fair. However, if you do make a mistake or if you do get pushed out wide, then you can just drive the car across here. Obviously, if you do make a position and it's not fair, you'll have to give that position back in a race. But it's just nice to know that you've got a bit of room for error as you're coming through turns 6 and 7. However, it's a case of getting back on the throttle at this point as soon as you can. Again, riding as much curb on the left, through the left as we possibly can. Again, if you're in a GT car, you'll probably be able to be a bit greedier with the curb and open up the chicane a little bit more than we can in this little radical. By this point, you can see Yanni's flat out on the accelerator, so we're really focusing on the exit, and he's using all of the road on the outside here, so he's got a great line on the exit. You can see here again, as with all the curbs here at Hungaroring, it's quite aggressive, especially as you're coming towards the outside of the curb here. But beyond that, if you can get beyond that consistently, then we run onto the concrete here, which has a reasonable amount of grip, and it's obviously completely smooth. So you run onto the concrete, keep it out here where Yanni is at the moment, and then bring the car back onto the circuit. Next up, we've got turns 8, 9, 10, and 11. Left, right, left, right. It's probably the most fun part of the circuit from a driving perspective. Well, for me anyway. They're all medium, fast corners, and probably the quickest corners that we do have here at the Hungaroring. So as we're coming in, it is quite tricky to see the apex, but at this point, you can see that we can just see the curbing on the inside of the circuit here. Now in the radical with quite a lot of downforce, it's just a lift as you're coming in here, so it is a really fun part of the track. And as we're coming in towards the apex here, again, you can see those telltale rubber markings on the inside, so you can see where the apex is. We're bringing the car in towards that just there. Now Yanni's used quite a lot of curb here. In the driving that I did in the radical at Hungaroring, I wasn't using quite as much curb on the inside here because it was destabilizing the car just a little bit. But if you're in a GT car, if your car can get away with using that much curb, then please use as much as you can and open up the corner as much as we possibly can. You can also see that we're making the curb quite late. Let me just go backwards just a little bit. So yeah, we're making the curb actually all the way around here. It's quite late, 3/4 of the way through the curb and making the apex all the way here. You can see, look, the end of the curb's just here, and we're just swooping past it here. Now the exit of turn 8 is a bit of a compromise, because if we're using all the road on the outside here, then we can't get the car back over to the left and into turn 9 as we want here properly. So you've got to compromise the exit of turn 8, get the car back over to the left as much as you possibly can. Again, moving your vision down here towards the apex of turn 9, which is critically important. So as we bring the car over to the left, we let it pause just for a second so the car settles before we turn the car in towards turn 9. Just as a side note, on the exit here, you can see that again there's this concrete tarmac runoff on the outside. It's unlikely that you'll go off here, although in this year's Formula 1 we saw quite a few of the cars go off into this runoff, and some of them go off into the wall. But generally, it's not a piece of the circuit or the runoff that we'll be using. So we're bringing the car gently in towards the apex of turn 9. Really critical here to be super smooth on the steering. Any harsh inputs into the steering wheel will cause the car to slide. Again, if we just move the frames backwards a little bit, we're making the curb quite late in the full amount of the curb, as you can see here. So it's 3/4, maybe even a little bit further past that, where we're making the apex of the corner. Again, there's a few telltale marks. It is difficult to see, but on the inside here you can see that the grass has been rubbed away. Obviously, grass grows and it changes throughout the year, but generally there will be this dirt on the inside of the track, so you can confirm that you've made the apex in the right point by just being conscious of the dirt on the inside of the circuit here. Again, here it's important to get back on the accelerator as early as we possibly can. Try not to use too much curb here. Look, you can see how aggressive the curb is in these areas here. So if you are using loads of curb, especially in a sports car or a single-seater, it's going to destabilize the car. So only use probably half of the curb on the inside here, unless you're in a GT car, and then you'll have to see if your car can accept this fairly aggressive curb on the inside of turn 9. Exit of turn 9's fairly standard. We need to use all the road and then get the car back over to the right hand side so that we can get through turn 10 as quickly as possible, slightly quicker than the previous two turns, and another left right. So we're bringing the car back over to the right hand side here in the radical. Now we're not bringing it all the way to the outside here because turn 10 is flat out in the radical because it's got so much downforce. However, if you're in a car that doesn't have any downforce or not as much downforce, or is a bit quicker in a straight line, you're probably going to need to get the car back over to the right hand side here before we go into turn 10. Turn 10, quick left-hander, you want to get your vision up around here so you're looking towards the inside of the corner. It is difficult to see because you've got the barrier there on the inside. However, you just need to have your vision across so that you can catch a view of the curb as soon as possible. And again, you can see where the apex is. You can see the difference in the colour of the concrete on the inside here. Look, you can see it changing colour around here and again on the inside of the corner. So there's always those telltale marks as to where the apex absolutely is. So you can see we're flat out in the radical here. And what's important at this point, whatever car you're in, is that we get the car back over to the right hand side here. So it may be that you need to compromise turn 10, not carry quite as much speed through turn 10 so that you can get the car back in this area. So we open up turn 11, which is important because it has a short straight after it. So we can open up turn 11 as much as we possibly can. So Yanni's brought the car back over to the left hand side as much as he can and is put himself in a good position here to open up turn 11 as much as he can and carry as much speed through here as possible. Again, there isn't any real reference for the apex point, apart from the fact that it's about 3/4 of the way along the curb, and again we have this changing colour on this concrete step and we have the fact that the grass has been rubbed away where GT cars have run onto the grass. So again, it's really important here at turn 11 that we're getting on the accelerator as soon as possible. So we need to shift our vision towards the exit point so we know how much and when we can get on the accelerator. And he's just got a bit of oversteer there at the apex, and he's got the exit very well done there, using all the curb on the outside. Now that would have been quite a rough ride in the radical. He's using the absolute legal limit of the track here, so he's just got 2 wheels inside the white line just here. Now the reason that I say that it's a bit of a rough ride in the radical, because the red and white curb here is the standard curb that we've got throughout the whole circuit, which does start to get a little bit aggressive as you move further out. However, the red curb is a step beyond that, and it's really aggressive on the outside just here. So it would have been a bit of a rough ride. However, it's worth it so that he can carry as much speed through turn 11 as possible. Now you'll notice again on the outside there's concrete or tarmac beyond that. It's not legal to use that because, as you can see, in this position he's just got 2 wheels inside the white line, which is the legal limit. If he went onto the concrete, then that means that he would have all 4 wheels beyond the outside of the track, and it would be illegal. So if he did his fastest lap, or if he overtook somebody because of this, then it would be up for penalty. It brings the car back onto the circuit. We're heading down to turn 12 now, which is quite an awkward right-hander. Always feels like you could have carried a bit more speed into it, and it's really easy to make a mistake actually. As you can see, we're heading downhill now, so the braking's going to be a little bit tricky. The rear's going to be a little bit light. We do have quite a few markers here. It's important that you're late on the brakes coming down into turn 12. So we've got a few markers. We've got the end of the fence on the left-hand side. We've got the 100-meter board just here. We've got the start of the curbing, the entry curbing, as we head down in towards the braking zone. So there's the 100-meter board. Coming a bit deeper, we've got the start of the entry curb just here on the left-hand side, and then beyond that we've got the marshal's post. But I don't think anybody will be braking down there. You can see here that the radical's braking just beyond, or he's getting off the accelerator. The brake trace isn't working on this data logging system, but he's getting off the accelerator just here, which is just beyond the start of the entry curb. So most cars, most GT cars, saloon cars, will be back a little bit further, probably somewhere around the 100-meter board or just a little bit before. So as I mentioned, you do need to brake a little bit earlier than you'd be used to because we're coming down the hill. The rear of the car will be a little bit light, but we're keeping the car over to the left-hand side. You can see here that he'll have his vision across at the apex of the corner here. It's a relatively simple standard corner. Bringing the car into the apex, and again using as much curb as we can. As you can see here, Yanni's using a lot more of the curb than he has used in other areas of the circuit. Now it's just that the curb here isn't really any different. It's a bit slower, the corner, than some of the other corners. Second gear, as you can see, but he's using a bit more of the curb, and this is something that you have to experiment with throughout the circuit here at the Hungaroring, if your car will accept the curb. Obviously, we're trying to open up the corner as much as we possibly can, but we don't want to take too much curb if it's going to mean the car will oversteer at the apex or will destabilize the car a little bit too much, because that then will make our exit out the corner slower than it needs to be. So it seems here that Yanni's car can accept all of this curb on the inside of the corner here, and it's not causing him too much trouble from apex to exit. On the exit of turn 12 here, we've got a relatively thin curb and then a little bit of concrete beyond that. So you ideally want to try and get your outside tyres on this concrete so it's nice and smooth as we're coming out. It has a relatively high amount of grip, but we do not want to go beyond the concrete on the outside. As you can see here, we've got some AstroTurf, which won't give you that much grip, especially as we're coming through turn 12. And as we're coming out, it's a traction zone, so we're trying to get on the accelerator. And if you're trying to do that on the AstroTurf, then it will certainly cost you time. So coming into the final 2 turns, turns 13 and turns 14, we have a 180-degree left, followed by a 180-degree right. So braking into turn 13 is quite tricky. There aren't really any markers on the outside. We have the beginning of the entry curb here, but it's a little bit too early. So you'll need to go beyond here, and it's really a braking area that you'll just need to do on feel. You'll need to get into the rhythm of the track and know when and where you're braking based on previous laps and how early you get over to the right-hand side of the circuit. So as you can see, Jan is all the way over to the right-hand side, probably using a little bit of the entry curb on the right just down here. As long as you don't use too much, it won't destabilize the car under braking. But again, he's not running the car around the outside of the corner here to open up the exit. He's bringing it in somewhere towards the middle of the road as we're coming into the corner entry. And the reason for that is that we're braking across the track, so we have better braking, more efficient braking. And then later in the corner, we'll slow the car down, get it rotated, and then straighten the car up and accelerate coming out of the corner. And this is a technique that you'll want to use on these long corners at Hungaroring. We've already seen it through turns 2 and a few other times throughout the lap. So it's somewhere in the middle of the track. He's just waiting for the car to turn here. And you can see now we're actually quite deep into the corner. We're quite a long way to the right-hand side of the track here. So it's at this point where he's now trying to get the car turned as sharply as he can. You can see the steering angle that he's got in the steering wheel here, getting the thing turned as much as he can. And now, if you just watch down here, you can see that the car's, if I wind it back a few frames, now it's beginning to turn. So at that point, somewhere between halfway and 3/4 of the way through the corner, you want to have that slight little lift on the accelerator to get the nose to bite in, get it to turn, and then get back on the throttle. Now, he hasn't quite made the apex on the inside here. It's not that important. It will have cost him a tenth or so, but what's more important is being late on the brakes, getting the car turned at the right point, and now he's opening up the steering wheel and he can get back on the throttle. Actually, he's already flat out on the accelerator down here in the radical, which has so much grip. So now it's just a case of letting the car push towards the outside of the circuit. Now you can see here, he hasn't used all the road on the outside. He could have got on the throttle a little bit sooner and used the curb on the outside here. Standard curb on the exit of turn 13, as we've seen all the way around Hungaroring. Fairly aggressive curb followed by a little bit of concrete on the outside. So if you can, try and get onto that concrete. Don't get onto the AstroTurf because we're in a traction zone and it will cost you a bit of time. Now the tricky thing coming out of turn 13 is that the pit entry, as you can see just here, is right on the racing line. So it is a little bit tricky if you're racing and you want to get back into the pits for a pit stop and you're on the inside of somebody, for example. However, just bear that in mind. So as you come into turn 13, if you do need to come into the pit lane, just keep the car over to the outside and pop into the pits just here. Coming out of turn 13 and into turn 14, we're trying to get the car back over to the left-hand side as much as possible. And in terms of braking references, we're not using braking references here. It's quite a late braking zone. You need to have your vision at the apex here, and it's important to carry as much speed in through the entry phase of this corner as we can, but we do need to get a really good exit coming out of turn 14 because we have the only real straight at the Hungaroring following turn 14. So as you can see here, Jan is bringing the car across, and the radical has so much grip that you can actually brake after you've turned in here. Most other cars you'll have to brake, as we do generally, beginning in a straight line, then trail braking into the corner, so back here. But as I mentioned before, and as I mentioned through turn 13, the braking reference is done more from rhythm than looking at a fixed point on the circuit. A couple of reasons is that we need to have our vision at the apex, and there aren't really any braking references on the outside entering turn 14. So again, you can see that we're coming in this entry phase, we're somewhere in the middle of the track here. We don't want to be running around the outside. We don't want to be doing that because we can't get the car back into the corner. And also we want to knock off a few meters of the track by driving across it and saving ourselves a little bit of distance as we're coming in towards the apex. So you can see at this point here, as we're crossing the white line and as we're coming to the beginning of the curb on the inside here, we're somewhere in the middle of the road. And at this point, this is where Jan is trying to get the car to turn. Look, you can see he's got the proper steering angle in here. just if we wind back a little bit, he's almost got the steering wheel, or he's taken a little bit of lock out the steering wheel here. Now that isn't because he's not turning that much. It will have a slight amount of oversteer just at this point. So that little bit, that you can just see it in the steering wheel now. He's just balancing the car right on the edge, and then the car's settled down, and he's put this proper steering amount back into the car. So we're bringing the car back into the apex. Now the only real reference here for the apex point is that, again, it's 3/4 of the way through the corner. But just as you're coming into the corner, because it's so long, it's easy to feel quite lost. So you can use the end of the barrier here, which separates the pit lane and the track, as a bit of a reference. Now that isn't where the apex is, but you can just see how far through the corner you actually are when you get there. Because it's such a long corner, it's difficult to know exactly when you should begin to bring the car back into the apex. So as you're coming up to this point here, this is where we're going to bring the car from somewhere around the middle of the track and start bringing it back in towards the inside of the track, as you can see here. And Yanni's making the apex somewhere around the first big red section of paint on the inside here. So if we bring it back, it's a Hungarian flag, and we've got the start of the pit wall barrier on the right, and then it's white, green and red. So that's where you need to begin to be getting towards the inside curb here. And at this point, it's all feel. We should be looking towards the outside of the corner here. You can see the marshal's post on the outside, but it is tricky to see because obviously we've got the pit lane barrier on the right hand side here. So you just need to have some rhythm. You need to have some experience around this track to be able to see or know exactly the positioning of your car and when and where you can get back on the accelerator on the exit of turn 14. So we maximize that speed coming out of the exit and all the way down the next straight, and that's why it's important. So as you can see here, we're coming out the corner. The exit point is somewhere under the gantry here, so you can see that there's a gantry running across the track, across the top here, and that's where the exit point is. So as you're coming out, as the view comes to you, begin to look there and know that that's about where you should be making the outside of the circuit. Now it's really easy to get greedy on the outside of the track here, try and get on the throttle that little bit too soon. Now, standard curbs, as we've seen all the way around the Hungaroring, we've got the red and white normal curb and then onto the concrete here. Now, I would try to only use the red and white curb, run onto the concrete if you do come out a little bit too soon, but try not to run onto the AstroTurf. There'll be marbles out there. It isn't that grippy, so once you go onto the AstroTurf, it's really difficult to come back onto the track. So at the maximum, use the concrete on the outside of the circuit, but nothing more than that. And there we are, back onto the start-finish straight, and we've completed our lap of the Hungaroring. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any tips or tricks around the Hungaroring, please leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please share it with your social media. Also, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out the Driver 61 Motorsports store. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.